Alrighty. Hey, geeks. Welcome to episode 5 of Geek on My Sleeve. Hold on here. Sorry about that. I was getting a little bit of feedback on my end. Thank you to everybody who's joining us live, and everybody who's watching this afterwards. Looking forward to geeking out with you guys over the end of Game of Thrones. Long time coming, as well as Fire and Blood. A Targaryen History. With all the fire and fury fans have come to expect from internationally best-selling author George R. R. Martin, this is the first volume of the definitive two-part history of the Targaryens in Westeros. Centuries before the events of a Game of Thrones, House Targaryen, the only family of dragon lords to survive the doom of Valyria, took up residence at Dragonstone. Fire and Blood begins their tale with the legendary Aegon the Conqueror, creator of the Iron Throne, and goes on to recount the generations of Targaryens who fought to hold that iconic seat, all the way up to the civil war that nearly tore their dynasty apart. What really happened during the Dance of Dragons? Why did it become so deadly to visit Valyria after the Doom? What is the origin of Daenerys' three dragon eggs? These are but a few of the questions answered in this essential chronicle, as related, a learned maester of the Citadel, and featuring more than 80 all-new black and white illustrations by the artist Doug Wheatley. Readers have glimpsed small parts of this narrative in such volumes as The World of Ice and Fire, but now, for the first time, the full tapestry of Targaryen history is revealed. With all the scope and grandeur of Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Fire and Blood is the ultimate Game of Thrones, giving readers a whole new appreciation for the dynamic and often bloody and always fascinating history of Westeros. Whew, a lot itself. The fact that it's one of two parts. Um, if you consider yourself a Game of Thrones fans, this really fills in the history for you. So today I have Pete joining me to geek out over Fire and Blood as well as the season finale of Game of Thrones. Uh, Pete, what'd you think of the book?
It was a good book. Does great in explaining a lot of kind of like the houses and how they came to be and what their morals and values are. It does very well. You can
You
see where a lot of things come from.
Yeah, it definitely looks like I'm having some problems with my
Yeah,
camera
your
here.
your camera's not showing up.
All right, I will try to troubleshoot that on my end, but yeah, you really do get to learn a lot more about the houses and the backstory. Uh, the first time I went through this book was right before the last season came out, and it really got the wheels turning in my head as I'm hearing these same types of stories over and over again in this history that really made me wonder what was going to happen in the season finale. Um, but yeah, sorry here, trying to troubleshoot this. Um,
So, trying to think of where's a good spot to start with it.
it. there's just so many good stories. Now, like again, for those of you who haven't read it, it reads like a history book. So you don't get the internal monologue that you're used to when you're following the characters. It's all from the maester's point of view. But going through the 300 years, there's so many of these stories of the Targaryen line that you're like, wow, they could do a whole series off of just section of these kings' lives, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another kind of funky twist to it. Like the origin or the beginning of the story has been recorded very well, and you've got a kind of clear, concise, chronological. This is how it all plays out. But then, about the middle to maybe the last third of the book, you have the author takes kind of a funky twist where he references several different people and several
I,
different books that have been written, and it kind of leaves it more to where you kind of get to put your own opinion or spin on it, or give
right.
and take, and it's a interesting dynamic for him.
Well, yeah, and history, it's always from the narrator's point of view, right? So it's
Or
kind of
to the victors go the spoils, or the
right,
winner writes the war.
right. The winner gets to write the history of,
Yeah, there you go.
the wrongs and the rights and who is good and who is evil. So it was kind of fun. And oh, Mushroom, the I guess like the court jester was kept his own chronicles, and it was always funny
Yeah.
hearing his narrative on these epic moments where the magisters are all prim and proper about their accountings. It would never say, I guess not never, but be a little bit more politically correct with their.
Well, and there's a point in the book where what is it, Maiden's Tale, or
Oh yeah, yeah.
chronicle for women or what not to do,
Hmm.
where it kind of brings the whole aspect of you know these kings and queens go through a lot of the same stuff that we do, and that's what I kind of feel is happening with Mushroom and the Maesters. The Maesters are like, oh well, I'm only going to show you the best side, and this is what really happened, blah blah blah,
Hmm.
and Mushroom has a different spin on it.
Yeah, he gives it a little bit more raw and comical as to be expected from the jester's point of view or whatnot. Um, but yeah, so there the book itself is huge, and for this geek out session, okay, sorry, having my computer wanting me to do updates midstream. Um, I really felt that the season finale tied really well into Blood and Fire. And instead of going through the play by play on each, just kind of wanted to geek
Connect
out a
the
little
dots.
bit. Yeah, connect the dots a bit and geek out on this amazing series and the prequel. Um, but yeah, season finale of Game of Thrones, Pete. What'd you
Epic.
think?
What a twist. Like,
Yeah.
I from not the last episode, but second to last episode, we are like, all right, well that's it. She's won, she's got it. Here
Hmm.
we go. And I was still rooting for John. I was like, ooh, we got a lot going on. I think John's gonna be our man. You know, John's just had such story throughout all of it.
Oh, he's grown so much.
Yeah, and died and came back to life and was supposed to be king of the north, but he's actually a Targaryen, and
The
just
She said the prince that was promised, right? And I remember reading online some people kind of wondering what was up with that. Um, but yeah, I'm with you. It was a lot of fun the final season talking to friends who followed the series, like who's going to sit the Iron Throne. And there were moments throughout the last season that it could be anybody, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
and it, again, the character development in the series, you go from hating somebody one season to loving them the next season to rooting for them the following season, and then everyone else in between just getting killed off along the way. And we certainly saw a lot of that in the final season.
That's one thing that really, when from season one, I knew Game of Thrones was going to be different because most of them, your main characters are overpowered and all
Yes,
knowing, and the good is good and evil is evil. But like
yes.
you're saying, the character develop and the dynamic and the situational awareness and how
And
I
the
just
fact that he's not afraid to kill off the main cast,
oh yep
right?
yep
Like that is something that I can truly appreciate about a series is I get so frustrated sometimes when I'm reading these epic fantasy series and it's like, "Oh, you know, this is a main character or the main love interest. It doesn't matter how scary this moment is. They're going to find a way out. You can't kill them off. Game of Thrones? No. One moment you're in love with the character, the next moment they're dead, right?
yep.
I mean, just list a couple off. Rob Stark, right?
Yeah,
Like
right from the beginning.
never lost a war, and yet Red Wedding. Um, gosh, Ned, right from the
Yep.
get-go. There's all the jokes about like when your friends start watching Game of Thrones, they're like, "Oh man, I want Ned to sit the Iron Throne," and you're a couple seasons later, have read the books, you're like, "Keep watching." uh, oh snap! I haven't already. If you haven't figured it out, spoilers ahead. Obviously, we're breaking down Blood and Fire, Game of Thrones series. So yeah, yeah.
Is your camera trying to update?
I don't know what's going on with my camera, and it's certainly not helping that I'm trying to troubleshoot it while geeking out here. Um, but yeah,
So, as the final season or the final episode of the season is playing out, you kind of start off with, seeing the destruction that Danny has wrought and just like how, there's women and children in the street and everything's just destroyed. And through Blood and Fire, that's a lot of their power because the Targaryens have the dragons, and that's their coup de grace or their finishing move or however you want to put it. And through the beginning of it, that's how Aegon the Conqueror, pretty much gets everything. I think
right.
Aegon does very well where he's kind of got it all. He's like a triple threat where he's like, hey, if you bend the knee, if I am your lord, I am the king,
Hmm.
then I will reinstate you in all your titles and lands.
Yeah,
And
he
he
he was a really good
also,
ruler about that. Like it wasn't about kicking them when they're down. It's like, hey, bend the knee and you can keep what you had. It's just, I'm king.
yep, I'm head chief. And then also, whoever didn't bend the knee, he wasn't going to mess around with it. It was pretty cut and dry. It was overwhelming, and it just set an example for the rest of them. But
Right.
so I mean, that's the power of the Targaryens throughout the Game of Thrones series. We don't see a whole lot of it, and they've kind of faded out, and the whole speculation of like where Dany got her dragons and whatnot.
Yeah, I really appreciated how you got a lot of those questions that you had while watching the season, the 8 seasons, um, get answered in Blood and Fire. So if you've watched the TV series and you really consider yourself a fanboy or girl, Blood and Fire is worth or Fire and Blood. Wow, keep butchering that. Fire and Blood is worth reading. It's a bit dry because it's more of like the history book type setting, but it's just so rich with content. And hearing about the houses as they um, interact with each other and the Game of Thrones pretty much narrative for 300 plus years, and to bring it back, kind of like what you were saying earlier on with the Targaryens, in a lot of ways, because they had dragons was the deciding factor for why they should rule, right? Like after they
Yeah.
became the Seven Kingdoms, it's like, well, they have dragons. They're not common people.
And you see a lot of people try and, be like, oh, well, we've got a strong fortress. Stone doesn't burn. We
Hmm.
know what we have, and, you can't take it from us. But they're so used to combating and fighting with other people who are on a similar playing field,
Right.
or the Targaryens or dragons. It's just,
Yeah, and you see that all throughout the TV series. Like this is the 300 years prior, but even as Daenerys goes through and um, kind of we follow her across the seasons, it's like, well, she is the mother of dragons, right? And one of the Tyrion says it in the very last episode. Our queen's nature is fire and blood. These are the Targaryens. They are. Um, there were points in the book Fire and Blood where they talk about they're closer to gods than men because of their bond with the dragons.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, the final episode, all the feels. I mean, you're talking about John, how far he's come, the actual heir to the Iron Throne, yet he defers to Dany. She is my queen. Tyrion gets locked up because, of course, he looks after his family.
Yeah.
Um, and Tyrion's reasoning with Jon, most loyal guy out there. And yeah, what do you think about their final scene together as Jon approaches her as she's looking at the Iron Throne finally, like we're finally there. What we've been waiting
Or
for.
Yeah, I thought that was very iconic, or a lot of symbolism throughout it, because uh, Danny finally gets to the Iron Throne, and she puts her hand on it, and she's right there. She feels as if she's made it. There's still a lot of the world to have them understand, but she's right there. And before she sits down or anything, John comes in to the room, and that's where then they both talk, and you've got those feels of, oh, hey, Danny's the one who has it, but I want John to have it. And
I
they start,
I'd be curious to know your thoughts, and those of you who are watching this after the fact or in the live stream, toss it in chat. But I really feel like John gave her every chance to do quote what's right? Like that's one of
yeah,
John's
yeah.
pillars. He always wants to do what's right at the end of the day. Like what is just, what is, and that's why we love him. Um, but as he's talking to her, he's like, I saw Grey Worm out there in the streets, slaughtering Lannisters, right?
Yeah.
Babies burned, and um, his queen, if you will, has the god complex that is so common with the Targaryens, and we're it's a matter of what we say is right. I know what's right. You know what's right. But what about? And John's like, well, what about them? It's like, they
They
don't
don't get a
matter,
choice.
right? We have the Iron Throne,
Yeah.
and yeah, he'll always be my queen.
Yep.
Oh,
And then, going on with that scene, he kills her. He stabs her because at the end of the day, he knows that first off, there's a lot of things going through his head where he is the heir. He doesn't want it,
Right.
just like in the North, he didn't want to be king, but that doesn't mean Danny isn't going to see him as a threat in the future, and he can't, maybe he gains power through someone else's, means
Right.
or whatever. So that's a big threat. So he's got that going on. He just confronted her about what is going on in the streets and, the innocents
Mhm.
burned and Grey Worm and what he's doing. So he's, not feeling so good about that. And then,
I
uh,
There's a lot of factors, and I think a lot of those are playing out for John, but, I think in a lot of ways he keeps opening scene, um, there he is with Bran, right? Talking to him about don't look away as Ned swings the sword, right? Like, if you're gonna do you gotta take responsibility for your lands. He's the
yeah, yeah,
heir, like, he's gotta do the deed, right? Look her in the
yeah.
eyes or whatnot as he stabs her, and, yeah.
Then you get the dragon who comes in and, destroys the iconic throne. The
Mhm,
throne of swords that, we're all fighting over
mhm,
and was built by the Targaryens, which you learned that through Fire and Blood, where Aegon the Conqueror, pretty much everyone who he had to take over, he collected all their swords, sent them back, and created a throne out of it. But
right.
so the dragon destroys that and, takes her and goes off.
The something I miss in the TV series that the actual book series does really well is explains the magic system and the warg and dragon bonds a bit better. Um, but I feel the TV series really did that well because was it Drogo was there or Dracarys was there like right after she got stabbed, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
feel the
obvious there's a
bond.
connection there, right? Um, and then we cut to the council,
Yeah,
and oh my goodness, talk about the feels as you look around at the chairs there. Um, yeah, was it Brienne of Tarth, Sam, the Starks, um,
the Onion Knight,
the Onionites, Sir Davos. Um,
the
yeah,
Ironborn lady. I can't think of her name.
yeah, Theon's sisters was it Yara? But yeah, and again, tying it back to Fire and Blood, there were several times where they had great councils like that of the lords and ladies of Westeros. Um,
That's what Aegon really tried to do. When he came in, he was like, "Hey, I'm king," but
mhm,
he created and collected a council of all of Westeros.
mhm.
Primarily men, but a lot of women had an influence in it, and that was kind of his.
Well, his queens and the other females of the Targaryen line really did a lot. Uh,
Of
forget.
ruling or
Yeah, yeah, sticking up for the little people. Um, as well as, helping get them their rights and freedoms. We could go on a long rant about all that, about doing what they could to protect the small folk and the right of the first night or whatnot, where
yeah,
the Lord of the Lands could show up on your wedding day and, uh, you
take her
know,
maidenhead and all that.
yeah, yeah. And it was the queens that showed up and said, hey, how would you react? Well, I'm not a butcher. I'm not a blacksmith. It's like, well, that doesn't make
But
you.
a man's a
Yeah,
man, and we don't need blacksmiths killing kings.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, we went down the rabbit hole there, but
So
yeah,
with
blood and
uh,
fire, or fire and blood. Uh, the council have everybody there. Um, Sansa, they're basically deciding the fate of the prisoners, right? So we got Jon and Tyrion,
Yep. And
and and yeah, Sansa opens up with her flex about how there's thousands of Northmen standing outside King's Landing, and Grey Worm isn't scared and talks about how there's thousands of Unsullied, and you have those trying to protect Jon, right? And those wanting justice. Justice is a word they throw around a lot in that meeting. The Unsullied don't care about getting paid or perks when Davos tries to smooth things over and send them to the Reach. They want justice for Jon. Um, but yeah, the that whole scene was just gosh, so many little nuggets there tying
yeah,
back and forth between the book and the show. Um, Looking through Fire and Blood, you get a lot of the back history behind the Ironborn and how the Greyjoys came to be the head household there. So seeing them at this council and how what was um wow, brain fart. Um,
I don't know where you're trying to go with that.
yeah, I don't know where I'm trying to go with that either. It was just it's interesting leading up until that point because lands and titles moved around in the years prior to that, and just seeing how all the strings came together, how all the power behind the Starks get built up, both through their father, the Starks family, as well as the mother's family. Uh, but yeah. So anyway, back
So yeah, there's
back to the scene.
I'm trying to remember where we're at for the scene.
They're going back and forth, exchanging threats about Jon Snow, and Arya's pretty much threatening to cut anybody's throat who wants to kill Jon. So holding true to the thousands of Northmen, everybody tired of fighting, and um, I'm looking through my notes here. Yeah, Davos, like always, is trying to play peacekeeper, right? Suggests to the Unsullied to go to the Reach. We don't need to fight anymore. Talk about tens of thousands of men dying in the Great War against the undead, and thousands of men dying in the battle for King's Landing. And then, of course, Tyrion, who's standing there, who can never keep his mouth shut. The little imp kind of grabs the reins of conversation and basically tells the Unsullied, like, hey, you're foreigners, right? This is Westeros. It's up to these guys to
Yeah,
decide.
it's not for you to choose.
Hmm.
And
And
when they're like, "Oh well, who's going to be king or who's going to be queen?" and just the feels and the look, he's just like, you guys are it. You know, you're the
right,
most powerful people in Westeros. Choose one.
what I really enjoyed about this scene is you really got to see um, these main characters that you've come to grow and love, their strong character traits play out, right? Like, who is Tyrion? He always talks about his sword is words, right? And he just so beautifully, um,
Directs and
yeah, he's a prime example of it's not about what you say, it's how you say it. He's like, you're the most powerful people here. Um, like, make a decision.
Oh man,
And
and the way Sanser just snuffs her uncle, he gets up and he's like, "All right, feel like I got this." And she's
I
like, just sit down."
I felt awkward for him,
You
and
know,
because I
and I
was,
thought she was gonna have something like, "Oh, well, really, it's me." But no, she just wanted to shut him down,
yeah,
just fine.
she learned lessons from Littlefinger, right? She's a little bit more subtle than that, but yeah, when he stands up and she's just like, Uncle, please sit, and he looks around and everybody's kind of like avoiding eye contact, like, please sit. And then, yeah, you go to Samwell, and of course, his backstory. No one ever thought he was going to be heir to his household. Like his
Yeah,
father basically forced him to join the Night's Watch because he was a coward, and he wanted his younger son to inherit. So here he is, stands up. He's like, "Well, why are we picking this? It's for it. They're going to rule over everyone. Let's give everybody a vote." And then all these powerful people sitting there, like, what? Give up our power? We might as well let the dogs vote and the horses vote.
yeah.
And then, oh man. So I was thinking about this going into the stream. Who is, like so many amazing characters. And I have to say, Davos is probably one of my favorite characters. I don't know if I can clearly claim my favorite. Would love to hear from everyone else who their favorite character is or one of their favorites and why in the comment or in the chat. But Davos, if Tyrion is helping kind of lead this, like Davos is asking the real questions, and he's kind of like, well, then who, right? Um, who's going to be?
That and he just pacifies things so well too. Kind of
Hmm.
like when John and the Unsullied were executing people in the street. You know, it almost
Hmm.
got violent. He's just like,
Oh
"Well, you
yeah,
both
diffuse the
say, hey, for
situation.
the queen, for this, for that,' and he's like, well, they're kind of doing what they're supposed to do. Let's go talk to the queen about it."
And in the books, it really does a good job kind of like playing out his character because he's an upjump smuggler, right? Like he was constantly, well, not maybe not constantly, but in a lot of life death situations where he had to read the situation real quick and figure out how to play it out. And here he is playing it out with all these lords of ladies in Westeros, even later on. He's like, I don't even know if I get to vote yet. Here he steers the conversation. Who should we pick? And Tyrion, um, steps up and he's like, well, what unites people? Armies, gold, flags? No, stories. And there's just so much about that. Like he goes on to say, like, there is nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. And like that's a big part of
Whole series.
why the whole series and just like all good stories in general, and why I'm so passionate about the Geek on My Sleeve project is because a good story has, you know the power to change things, to motivate. Tyrion goes on to talk about like nothing can stop it, no enemy can defeat it. um, and then it seemed like out of left field, but at the same time, again, you can go back to the very first episode where we're looking at Brand as his father executes the deserter. He goes like, and who has a better story than Brand the Broken, the boy who fell from a high tower and lived. He knew he could never walk again, so he learned to fly. Um, he crossed beyond the wall, a crippled boy, and became the three-eyed raven. He is our memory, the keeper of all our stories, etc., etc., etc. And the TV or the book series does a really good job delving into the warg abilities and following Bran's story as he travels beyond the wall and becomes the Three-Eyed Raven is just, if you like the TV series and you're going to pick up Fire and Blood, the book series is incredible as well. And last I read, George R. Martin said that the ending to the book series is going to be different than the TV series, which I find is interesting. Um, but anyway, so they go through and talk a little bit about it, and it just plays so well into kind of getting everybody what they want, right? Because Daenerys wanted to break the wheel, the system, everything that was wrong,
Yeah.
um,
And
which
who he knows what has been done that's wrong and what he can
mm-hmm,
do to make it better. And
mm-hmm.
but it was so out of left field because like the whole series you're rooting, rooting for John or rooting for
Right.
Daenerys or
If you would have asked somebody in season 5 or 6, the odds that Bran would be the one on the throne, I think he'd be pretty far down there on the list for most people. But but yeah,
way
and
out of
then
left field.
way out of left field, and he's like, if we choose you, will you wear the crown? And then what does Bran say? He's like, why do you think I came all this way?
Oh man, like he just has such a stoic face. Like
He
throughout
does,
it all, very little emotion, just like I'm badass, I know it.
right? I read, I forget her name, but he was talking to the actor for Sansa, and she said that, I feel like you're just like staring into my soul or whatnot. And he talks about how he has glasses, and if you ever see him out and about, he's almost always wearing his glasses. Well, he doesn't wear contacts. I guess his vision's really bad. So
Oh,
part of that,
that's where the face comes from.
yeah, part of that like staring off into the distance is because he literally can't see anything. So,
Method acting, whatever you got to do to get in your persona
right?
to
If if
deliver it. Yeah.
if it works. Um, but yeah,
Huh.
Brandon of House Stark, I say I. And then the first one, the first crack in the dam is Samwell, and then his uncle, and then everybody goes around the table um, until we finally come to Sansa, and she turns to him and she's like, "I love you, little brother, and I always will. You'll be a good king." But tens of thousands of Northmen fell in the Great War defending all of Westeros, and those who survived have seen too much and fought too hard ever to kneel again. The North will remain an independent kingdom as it was for thousands of years. And you get to hear a lot of the Stark's history in Fire and Blood, all the way from Aegon the Conqueror, where Stark, I forget his first name, became known as like the King Who Knelt, right?
Yeah.
And like that, they've been carrying that for so long. And the North is as big as the rest of the kingdoms, right?
Yeah.
Um, and
It's not
so,
as nice because it's all wintry and whatnot, but
right, right.
it's still a large volume.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's not easy living there, and that's part of what makes them so fierce, right? And
Yeah.
plays into their culture. Uh, but yeah, like again, coming back to like character development and whatnot, the fact that there was no Your Grace, there was no um my little brother. It was like, hey, this is a statement. We're staying independent. You know, the Northmen are outside, and for anybody who like knows the history, there were several times in Fire and Blood where when the Northmen came down when it was winter, just like it is at that point in the TV series, you know, they have old Nan talking about the great winter where old men and you know,
Any
crippled and
sickly or
yeah,
crippled individuals.
they go out into the snows just to freeze and die because of how hard the winters are and how they need to ration food. And
All about
uh
the succession or protecting their heirs and
yeah,
resources.
yeah, and we were talking about it off air beforehand, but you brought up the quote where I forget which war it was, but pretty much the Stark said, "Hey, it's winter back home. We marched south knowing that we were dead one way or another."
Oh,
So,
yeah, they're pretty much like, "Oh, well, if you do that, you're gonna die." And it's like, "We're already dead, boy.
right?
Came
So
here, and this is what we do."
these thousands of Northmen are pretty much thinking the same thing. It's like, hey, we just fought this great war, going through all our reserves of foodstuffs, et cetera. Like it's going to be hard one way or the other. Um, but yeah, Bran gives her a little nod, and we went from. I think the Starks have never really like had a serious play at the Iron Throne in
They've just kind of kept to the north.
yeah, they just kind of kept to the north, and now we have a king, Brandon of the Six Kingdoms, and Queen of the North, as battered and broken as it is. Um, but yeah,
Got John
all
going back over the wall towards
right.
with the wildlings, and then we've got
Yes,
Arya, who's young and who's gonna settle the West. What's past Westeros? All the
I
maps just end.
I want to go down the rabbit hole about the potential and speculation there about John becoming, king beyond the wall or whatnot, if you will, and then his sister Sansa being pretty much the kingdom in between him and the six other kingdoms.
Yeah.
But yeah, but before that, we got to talk about the hand,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah. That was just it was funny and it appeased everyone. Like Grey Worm's like, oh
he,
no, you can't do that. It's not
uh,
justice.
uh,
I can do that. I am the king.
right? No flinching there. He's like, you guys made me king. The king decides. Y'all just said that, and yeah. But Brango's like, "Yeah, Tyrion, you'll be my hand, and he, when he goes no, and I swear there was a pause, and then you could see the gears turn. He's like, "Oh, I just told the king no," and then follow up with, "Your Grace, I don't want it." And he's like, "Well, I don't want to be king." And he squirms. He's like, "Well, I don't deserve it." Tries to get out of it, et cetera, et cetera. That justice word they keep throwing around. This is your justice. You're going to spend the rest of your life making up for them mistakes.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's what you want in a leader or a ruler, right? You don't need the arrogance, cocky. Yeah, there were several times Tyrion reflected and realized he thought he was too clever or too brilliant, right? And he got himself in trouble, and we saw that throughout the series. So, yeah, as much as we don't get closure in a lot of ways, you get a little bit of closure there in knowing that between Bran, the all-seeing, all-knowing, three-eyed Raven, and Tyrion, they have a pretty good crew together. Um,
And that's another thing. So most series or books or whatever have a beginning, middle, and end. But kind of
right.
like the title says, this is a Game of Thrones. There is no ending. This
Nope.
world is going to persist and continue and develop, and it's all just a story that never ends. So, like,
You.
as much as I was disappointed with who became king at first, but
Mm,
it just breaks the wheel and creates such a different dynamic going forward. Yeah.
hmm Yeah. And you know that as they're sitting around in that council, part of the reason why they're even one of the many reasons why they're excited about the idea of coming together and voting and deciding on who becomes a king, if you will, is the gears at the back of their head turning, saying, oh, it might not be my family or my lineage this time around, but the Game of Thrones goes on. That's
Yeah,
plenty of
influence the
time
higher
for,
powers.
right, plenty of time to bribe and cajole and get, myself or my descendants set up for the next heir to the throne, or not heir, but next ruler of the Six Kingdoms. Um, but yeah, and then they decide to send John to the wall, and just that little scene was was pretty comical, right? John's to the Night's Watch, and again, you see that happen a lot with uh, the Lords of Westeros in Fire and Blood. Is there were several times that they chronicled in there after a big war or a shift in power
Yeah,
that,
for who they represented, and oh, you're fighting for the other side.
right, and then when it came to giving the sentence or the execution, so many that's where all the Night's Watch comes from, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The exiles or the losers of wars or whatnot, people on the wrong side, which cause problems and rebellions, which you get to hear about. Part of the history there in Fire and Blood of just all the battles and conflicts along the wall. But yeah, so the heir, the true heir to the throne, gets set to the Night's Watch, and John's like, "There's still a Night's Watch," and you get to see a little bit of Tyrion and John's relationship and humor, going all the way back to,
season, right?
yeah, I was about to say, is it episode 1 where they have the feast, or episode
Uh,
2?
I
It's
don't. I
beginning
think
of
it's
season 1,
yeah. It's in the beginning of season one when the Lannisters come down.
right? And you have the scene with the bastard boy, who wasn't really a bastard, but he was, the bastard, um, Jon Snow interacting with the imp,
Yeah.
and they kind of,
Oh, what's
you
that?
know,
That quote?
which one?
Or yeah, just about being a bastard. And
He
something
talks
happened.
about like imps or whatnot, or all dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes, or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah.
Like, hey, we're
They
we're
bond over it.
we're the outcasts of the family, and so Tyrion, he responds like, the world will always need a home for bastards and broken men, um, trying to ease him into going to the wall, talking about how no one is happy, which means that it's supposed to be a good compromise. And at this point, like, John's getting sent to the wall again, and all he cares about, like, was it right? Did I make the right decision? Here I've been in this cell for so long, and I'm just thinking about how I stabbed my queen, my love, my aunt.
Did I do the right thing?
Did
Hey,
I
Grandma.
do did I do the right thing? Um, but yeah, it's yeah, and then
So
so King Beyond the Wall,
yeah, there's
Queen of the
so
North.
much potential and evolution and other series that could be, like we've got the Starks all over the place, and each one of them could have their own series.
Hmm.
But it's if you enjoy this, Game of Thrones or the creators of it got okayed to do three separate or additional series, and the next
Hmm.
one in line is going to be the Targaryens origin or whatever, which is essentially the fire and the blood. So
There you go. So get a bit of the history before that comes out.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, as excited as I am about more TV shows, George R. Martin needs to get around to getting the next book out in the series. Like, I was current before the TV series started, and he's just been too busy with other projects.
I hate to
Uh,
say it, but I feel like it's gonna be a Star Wars where Lucas puts his heart and soul into everything, and then Disney buys him out.
Disney owns everything at this point, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, he's created such an empire and epic fantasy or story that it's going to outlive him. Like,
Don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't want anyone else working in the space.
oh,
Um,
okay, okay.
because you're right, like the Star Wars franchise, there's a lot of other book series out there with different authors, right? Like it's all
Yeah, it's
Lucasvision
in the
world.
world, but it's a
Hmm.
different arc or setting or yeah.
Right, right. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm
Okay, so
worried
he's
it's
just trying
gonna.
to finish and do his legacy.
Yeah, I'm worried that he's not going to finish it because I believe we're due for at least two more books. Um, and we've been waiting a long time on this last one. So yeah, yeah.
But couple good connections into Fire and Blood. So kind of like we talked about the Starks and
Mhm,
kind of like throughout the series we saw the Lannisters and Fire and Blood, they're always trying to, uh get favor or whatever for more power, and they're always trying to like marry into the Targaryens. That way they can start getting dragons and be
yeah,
equals instead of being under. And uh, the
they.
Greyjoys have always had the Iron Fleet and the ships and
Mhm. It's really. I know I talked about it with Samwell, but Tyrion being the heir to basically the Lannisters' legacy and whatnot. How all talked about legacy and that he would never be the Lord of gosh, what's their holding? The name of the Lannisters holding?
uh can't think of it. I want to say King's Landing, but that doesn't sound
No.
right.
Gosh, brain fart. If
High
anybody
Garden?
knows. No, Highgarden was for the flowers.
Oh, okay. Anyway,
Gosh,
that's probably my only.
Casterly Rock.
Uh,
Yeah. Gosh. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Pete, final thoughts on the TV series Fire and Blood?
oh, we're there already. Uh my I don't know. The book series did great. Can't wait for the second part of it. Um, Man, the ending, not ending of Game of Thrones, just so many feels. Wanna get more into it. Could go a million different directions. Right? It's a huge community. There's so much speculations, and kind of like you're talking, it brings people together. Just
Mm-hmm.
talk at the watering hole at work about all of the stuff that goes on throughout it.
It's true. It's true. Um, yeah. I hope the book series goes beyond the point where it ended in the TV series. Because we only got 6 episodes, so some of them were longer, right? In the end there, but just to kind of see how they wrap up, I'd really be curious to see how the North does after the Great War, right? Rebuilding and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what have you, as Jon Snow goes beyond the wall and deals with the wildlings and um yeah, like you said, there's so many different
Potentially the king
directions
along the
they could
wall,
go.
and
Yeah, the king
Arya
beyond the
could have
wall.
her own side story arc thing, which wouldn't necessarily be a Game of the Thrones because she'd be gone past Westeros.
Right,
But it's not to say that she couldn't find herself in manipulating her into a position of power
right.
or whatever. Um, and in the book, there's a scene where one of the Targaryen children steals a dragon. Is unhappy with what's going on, steals a dragon, and is gone for a year, year and a half, or something.
That's right.
And she comes back and she's got a fever and she's very sickly and essentially no one knows where she went, what happened, and it comes through that it's like, oh well, even though she's a Targaryen, didn't die due to the dragon, it's probably not where she went, it's where the dragon wanted to go, and the dragon was very old and he probably went back to more of an origin of where they're from,
Hmm.
or whatever. But she's got these, like, I don't know, they do a poor job of explaining it, but they're kind of like maggots, giant maggots or whatnot that are inside
Yeah.
her.
At one point, it was
And
like snakes with faces and arms or
yeah,
something like that. Or
and you could see them like crawling inside her skin, and
mm,
just I not to think that that might be, potential. Um, that's a very crazy thing. And then kind of
hmm
like also how in the book there was the sickness or whatever, the shaking sickness where everyone was getting sick, they would get cold and then
hmm
they would die off. But since the Targaryens are, the fire more or less, they were
right.
immune to it. But then with those snakes with faces creatures inside her, they when they put her in an ice bath, they died. So it's kind of, with all of our Northmen, or with Arya being of the snow and of
Yeah.
the ice, and her going past Westeros, which we don't know if the dragon went that way,
Oh,
but kind of the full circle of the dragons are fire, the Starks are ice, her
maybe they'll
being
have
more
some
so
immunity
immune
or
to.
whatnot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, took a while to bring it all together, but that's
No. Yeah, I like it. I would watch a series about her.
yeah,
Um, I think the little bit I was reading, some of the potential spin-off series that are going to do were like a lot of just kind of like different backstory and history, et cetera, et cetera. I want to follow Arya. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Man, I was so
No one.
sad and so disappointed when she didn't kill fucking the queen.
Cersei. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then I wanted Cersei to die so bad in so many different ways. Like as soon as she meets up with Jamie, I wanted or I wanted stones to come down and just crush her right in front of him.
uh,
But it didn't happen. They had their happy little reunion, and it all played out when Tyrion, found the golden hand sticking up, and
yep. Yep.
that
Ah.
was too good of a death for her.
There were so many other ways you'd like to see her go, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. She played the Game of Thrones well. She sat on there the longest, right? Out of the whole TV series.
yeah,
If not directly, indirectly, right?
yeah. And she had a
Um,
big influence, which is another kind of weird thing. The Targaryens throughout the book, they have a lot of incest to keep the dragon pure, and you see a little bit
mhm.
of that mentioned throughout the TV series, but it's weird that the Lannisters, not necessarily that's part of their practice, but that, Cersei Lannister and Jaime Lannister kind of,
Mhm.
I don't know if that has any ties to, know,
She used it as justification, right? Like, oh, the Targaryens did it.
yeah,
Like, um, and again, there's lots of references in Fire and Blood where you had the faith kind of go back and forth on their views of the Targaryens, right? Like,
yeah,
one point it was okay, the
ancestor
next
sin, and
it wasn't. Are they
yeah.
above our morals or not, et cetera, et cetera. The book is constantly making you question what is good, who is right, what is moral.
Well,
Um,
And honestly, oh man, I wish I remember the guy's name. My favorite king throughout the book, I want to say is Jaehaerys, and he was like from 50 AC to almost 100 AC.
The one
He
that is known
had,
as like the old king or
yeah,
whatnot.
yeah, the old king. He by far was my favorite because you get to see the whole scope of his life.
Hmm.
He has, right before him was Magon the Cruel, where a lot of
Hmm.
things were against him. So he didn't have a good like foundation to launch from.
Right.
But the fact of he learned from from the first king's mistakes, from the cruel king's mistakes, kind of kept his own traditions where he wanted to marry his sister, separated himself to go to Dragonstone and married. But when he came back, there was a lot of his mother or the queen was like, "Hey, don't do that. They're not going to accept it. I've seen everyone be destroyed by it." But he was like, "This is what I want to do," and he found a good way of implementing it where he had he fought with words first. He went and he had everyone preach of the different religions for, "Hey, this is the seventh. This is your laws. They're Targaryens. They have a
Right.
different origin.
Right.
They can ride dragons." Kind of funny snippet there. One of the guys like, "Oh, can I pork my sister?" And the minister or whatever they call him is, "Oh yeah, go get yourself a dragon, and I'll marry you guys." So you get,
Right.
but
Kind of hard to argue with that, right? But yeah,
yeah, yeah, and uh, he has such a great reign. There are moments where he's older, and there are coming to people coming to him and trying to sway him, and he just like cuts off their tongues or cuts off their heads.
part of what made him such a great king, and that's what's really fun about Fire and Blood, is you get to see all these different rulers and how they approach problems and how they handle things, et cetera, et cetera. But he was one of the few that actually had a decent upbringing, had time to go to Dragonstone and train and build himself up. And,
Yeah,
he wasn't the greatest swordsman, but he was determined and was able to build those relationships and earn the respect of his house or whatnot, if you will, around him. And he had a full reign, right?
yeah, yeah. He
Um,
actually, it's
and
sad what
his
happened after, but yeah,
and his queen was just phenomenal as well. I think she was one of the ones that expanded a lot of the laws for the common people
yeah, yeah.
and whatnot.
She
But
had her queen's companies or parties or I forget what they were, but they're just women input.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Whenever she would hold like a woman's council or whatnot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Where
yeah.
she would listen to the problems and challenges of the ladies of the land. And she even did it when she went to the wall, right? Was
Yeah,
it
yeah.
Moldstown
Or
or
well,
what?
she went to the wall and they're like, "There are no women here." She's like, "Come on, there's got to be some." And then they go a little back and yeah, go to Oldstown for it.
Yep,
What
yep,
what's the scene that happens there? The scene there is that's the first night bit
right.
where a king can declare the rule of first night, which you're supposed
Or
to
the
be
Lord
a
of the Land.
virgin.
It doesn't have to be.
Or yeah, yeah, a lord of the land, not
It could
necessarily a
show
king.
up at any wedding and bed the wife, right?
Yeah,
First
to take
rights.
their maidenhead, which is supposed to be for who she's betrothed to. Um, and they talk briefly about the history of it because we used to be conquerors and they used to be warriors, and after winning and taking their lands, it was a right, it was a custom, and it was something that
Right,
was never really addressed. And then they talk about where we're at now, and she was pretty much like, "Hey, if that happened on our wedding, what would have you done?" And
right,
he's like, "I would have killed him." Well, we don't want blacksmiths killing kings,
right.
so maybe we should get rid of this. No, we're not warriors anymore, and it just kind of brings the whole. the origin. Aegon the Conqueror didn't want to change a lot of it, but now where we're at, and I don't know.
That's that's what's nice and good about stories, right? It allows us to kind of examine some of these different challenges or issues, if you will, where it's, just because it's a custom or just because this is how it is, doesn't make it right or doesn't mean that's how it should be, right?
Yeah, that
Um,
and people get real hung up on traditions occasionally, like the whole
right,
religious. Hey, this is how it is. This is how it's supposed to be. Well,
right.
entitled to your opinion, but open your eyes.
Yeah. It's definitely a fun book if you want to know more of the history of Westeros and the Targaryens and even all the other houses, right? And seeing who marries who. Um, but yeah, yeah.
And then, sorry, little side snippet that I finally it finally connected after you read the Goodreads summary.
Okay.
There are three. There is in Blood and Fire. There's a woman who ends up leaving the Targaryens, and she wants to sail on the sea. She's kind of being
Mm-hmm.
pent up, and all of a sudden, three dragon eggs go missing. Well,
Yes.
they assume she stole them. They end up having a confrontation later with the Bravosi,
Yeah, the bankers of Bravos, I believe.
or she no, because it's with the people Bravosi of Free City. Anyway,
Okay.
so these three dragon eggs get away in Fire and Blood, and the only way for them to hatch is with the heat and with you know it being hot, which is where Dragonstone comes into play because dragons grow and are born on Dragonstone because of the heat and the sulfur and you know all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
those are Daenerys's eggs that she finds
Yeah.
over there. And it's cool to find that whole dynamic.
I'm I wish I would have wrote it down because it just goes to show how old those eggs are, right? And it wasn't
Yeah,
until they
yeah.
got warm and Daenerys started,
Walking into the fire with them and
yep,
whatnot.
yep, and taking care of them. And gosh, what a different story the series would be if she didn't have dragons, right? She just
Yeah,
would have been a girl um, from a quote unquote dead house.
yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's where, I think they have a dialogue about, oh, you know, would your king something me pretty stones, because that's all they are. They're just going to be
Mm-hmm.
pretty rocks.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, oh, I'd understand if we had chickens. And another good
Right.
thing Fire and Blood does is they talk about the faceless men. And
Mm-hmm.
kind of in that same scene, you know, he threatens, hey, well, if you have them, we're going to come and we're going to destroy you with dragons. It kind of implements it or threatens it. And he's like, oh, well, I know people too. They couldn't destroy, that many people and they couldn't, ruin the whole kingdom or whatever, but they could take out a couple, select few.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it all worked out for them in the end because they managed to get a large portion of the kingdom's debt forgiven, right? In the
Yeah, yeah,
process.
it was a series of unfortunate events that is great for leading up to Daenerys getting the dragons. Helps
Yep.
figure out. I think it was shortly after the golden wedding or whatnot, where they
Mm-hmm.
had spent a lot of the money to flaunt their riches and hey, look at us, we're great. You want us to rule, and then yeah. Another cool side note: the origin of King's Landing was great. you know, because
I
where we see it throughout the series now, it's this huge capital and there's so much going on. But throughout Fire and Blood, you know, they're when he first becomes a conqueror, they're like, "Where do you want to rule from?" And he's like, "I'm going to build my own thing." Because yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting to see it grow because it wasn't overnight, right?
No,
And
and
then
it
I think
started off as just some little town, and it was all, muddy streets, and things were built all cattywampus and everywhere.
it started very organic, and then I think it was the old king or
Yeah,
around
yeah,
there when
because I do better
started
with
doing
roads.
started doing the roads, even though he didn't see him finish. So, AKA the King's Road. But then, yeah, it King's Landing is what it is because of the Targaryens and building it up and housing all those people, and then to turn around and have the ending of the TV series or the book series being its destruction. It's I don't know.
Symbolic on so many levels.
It's symbolic on so many levels. The only reason why it was able to be built was because of the Targaryens, and she is the
The
one
ones
that,
who destroy it,
yeah,
Targaryens.
yep. And the same thing with the Iron Throne, right?
Yeah, the Iron
They
Throne can only be built by dragons.
yep, start and finished it. But yeah, I think we could probably go a couple more hours on this easily. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. Final thoughts, Pete?
If you haven't, go ahead and listen to Fire and Blood.
Yes. Or read it if that's your thing.
Or,
But
yeah, sorry, book.
audiobooks, audiobooks are certainly the way to go. But yeah, for those of you geeking out with us live or later on, if you're interested in doing another Game of Thrones themed geek out session, there's plenty of other books in um, the space that we would love to geek out on. Toss a comment below if you're interested, and we can get that on the books. But we currently have the next two books lined up for those that are interested. So, the next one, we're going to keep going with Sunday night. Next week, we'll be back at 6 p.m. Eastern, June 16th, and we will be transitioning back over to the Ascend Online series. Uh, Peter is nice enough to geek out with us next week on Legacy of the Fallen by Luke Chmalenko. Looks like it's not even going to let me share my screen either. So it's
Uh,
not my camera or the share screen. That's all right.
maybe, yeah.
They don't need to be able to read along anyway. So, Legacy of the Fallen, third book in release order, technically book two. Fresh off their victory over Graves and his followers, Marcus and his friends have managed to enjoy a few weeks of relative calm and peace as they continue to build Altford, preparing the town for a new wave of settlers coming from Iberia. But, at this, but as the days wear on with no new arrivals in sight, they begin to fear the worst, eventually setting out to search for their promised reinforcements and soon realizing that they weren't as alone on the frontier as they thought they were. Just managing to rescue a caravan of settlers in the nick of time from a horde of bandits, Marcus and the rest of Virtus barely have a chance to catch their breath before they find themselves thrust in the middle of Iberian politics, revealing a plot that threatened to not only take away their hard-won independence, but destroy Aldford completely. It's been a couple weeks since we did book 1.5 and book 1, but yeah, when we left off, they pretty much just formed Virtus, right?
So for at the end of the first book, he's like, "Hey, there's a lot of tyranny in the world, and we're going to stand for our virtues and what's right, and that the end of book two, we've got the main capital, and we've got all the thieves guilds and whatnot, and we just got
Hmm.
pulled into the other dimension of hell, and we just killed that, saved Iberia, and yeah, the third one is where we smash them together in Alford, more or less.
Yes, yes. The both casts from book one and 1.5 come together. And yeah, Pete and I are going to work our way back through that again. Hope to geek out with you guys on that June 16th at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then the following week, um, we are going to be geeking out on Skyward, another one of my favorite books by Brandon Sanderson. Uh, Defeated, crushed, and driven to almost extinction, the remnants of the human race are trapped on a planet that is constantly attacked by mysterious alien starfighters. Spensa, a teenage girl living among them, longs to be a pilot. When she discovers the wreckage of an ancient ship, she realizes this dream might be possible, assuming she can repair the ship, navigate flight school, and perhaps most importantly, persuade the strange machine to help her, because this ship uniquely appears to have a soul. Um, it's a young adult book, but it's one of my favorite books to gift to young adults, especially young women, because Spensa is just, um, such an amazing character. Um, But yeah, hopefully Pete will be able to join us for that as well. Pete, you've read Skyward already, right? Or listened?
Yes, I
Oh, there we go.
so Brandon Sanders is another phenomenal author and does a lot of good stuff, but this is a good one to start on because it's kind of short and sweet. It's in a new realm, so there's not a whole lot of extra or additional content right now.
I can't remember if it's part of his Cosmere or not. Um, but yeah, continue.
Um, it's a good book.
It's a great book, and it's worth picking up because I believe book two in the series is coming out relatively soon. So that again is going to be June 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern. I believe Dr. Natasha Aurora might also be joining us for that Geek Out session. So it'll be a slightly different format, expanding to a couple other people. Um, as always, we're looking for other people interested in collaborating and geeking out on these future Geek Out sessions. So if you're interested, please reach out to me by email, IG, anywhere you could find us on social media. Um, but yeah. Thanks again, Pete, for geeking out with me. If you'd like to support this channel, please share it with another geek in your life. Thanks, guys.
Bye.